Join Edwin Frondozo on the Business Leadership Podcast every week for a unique program featuring insights and actionable items from the world's most successful business leaders. Hear firsthand the exclusive interviews and personal journeys on how today's transformational leaders made it to the top.
We believe that if you focus on your own employees, on driving a very strong culture that has purpose, that culture eventually leads to a very positive customer experience. And if you get that customer equation right, typically you see higher growth and you see profitability.
This is the Business Leadership Podcast, and I'm your host, Edwin Frondozo. Welcome. How are you doing? How's your day going? Thank you for joining me. This is episode number 103, and my guest today is David Ossip. He is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer at Ceridian, one of the fastest growing human capital management technology companies. In 2009, David founded Dayforce, which was a highly successful SaaS-based workforce management software company. And in 2012, Ceridian acquired Dayforce, and shortly after that acquisition, David was named the CEO. He led the transformation of Ceridian into an innovative cloud human capital management company. And in this episode, which was recorded on February 27, 2019, you will learn how David successfully transformed Ceridian's culture from one of survival to one of innovation. The 3 ways to encourage every member of the organization to communicate and embody the culture, core values of the company. And lastly, how giving up an 8-figure deal helped David grow as a business leader. This episode is brought to you by Slingshot VoIP, a leader in business voice AI technologies that help companies understand what the customers are saying when they're calling in. The Business Leadership Podcast is a friend of the ITWC Podcast Network and supported by our media partner, IT World Canada. Thank you to those who have left a rating and comment on Apple Podcasts. I really appreciate it. This latest one from S.L, and they write, as a professional, I find this podcast so helpful. The podcast has a variety of experts and business leaders from different industries, and each episode is packed with valuable tips, actionable steps, and great discussions. Thank you, S.L. I really appreciate you, your support, and kind words. So when you do rate and leave a review, I will read it out on the next episode. Now here we go. Welcome to the Business Leadership Podcast, David.
Welcome to be here.
Well, I'm super excited. For those who are listening, this is actually a little bit of a short story. It was about a 1 year, at least, to get you on the show. So I'm super excited to have you, David, to get you into, just to learn more about you and your story. But David, I'd love it if you could share with us who you are and what you like to do when you're not growing and scaling businesses.
Well, that's a bit of a wide question. First, I'm a dad. I have 2 wonderful kids, and I'm an avid cyclist. And when I'm not kind of heads down at Ceridian, either driving carpool for my kids, taking them to their sports and activities, or I'm on a bike, usually climbing a mountain somewhere.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I could definitely relate to the fatherhood. Although my daughter's about 2.5 years old, but I do a lot of quote unquote carpooling, AKA going to daycare. What's the last mountain you climbed with your bike?
I just came back from our President's Club, which was on the Big Island in Hawaii this week, and climbed up a few of the big hills over there, which was interesting.
Amazing. I can't even imagine the views that you were able to take in at the time.
Lots and lots of lava.
That's great. David, let's just jump right into it. If you can share with us maybe a difficult decision that you had to make that allowed you to significantly grow as a business leader. Maybe it was something in your earlier career, or it could be something present as well.
If I think about the Ceridian and the Dayforce story, one very difficult decision that we made right at the time when we were bringing the two companies together was we had won a very large prospect, a $10 million deal for a European company. And we had to make the decision whether we could invest in bringing the companies together and the kind of the partnership between Ceridian and Dayforce, or whether we should do the take the large sales opportunity. And we elected to focus the company on the partnership instead of diverting the resources of the company to implement the very, very large European customer. And that was very difficult, as you can imagine, because back then it was probably 2011 or so for a youngish startup company to give up an 8-figure sales deal in order to focus on a partnership was very difficult.
That's super interesting. Talk to me about how that came about within, I guess, personally, you as the business leader of Dayforce, or how people reacted, your stakeholders or your executive team when it was like, okay, you know what? Let's forego this $10 million deal. like, did you look for counsel for that? Did you lose sleep?
So, I have to go a little bit back on the story for that because I think, I've been a serial entrepreneur for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
I had started Dayforce in 2009 when my non-compete from my prior company had expired. And what really had happened at the last company was that I ran out of addressable market. At the prior company, we did workforce management solutions for very, very large companies. And eventually, we had a very significant market share of workforce management in retail and banking and transportation and manufacturing. And we just really couldn't expand much more in that segment. And when we tried to take the tech down market, we found that it didn't really scale down because the technology requirements were too heavy for the small organizations. So in 2009, I had started Dayforce with the idea of using cloud technology to address this market. And because I was quite sensitive to market size, I started to look at the adjacent markets. And right adjacent to workforce management is payroll. And the payroll market I really found very attractive. One, it's a huge market, tens of billions. The second is that the requirements seem to be the same regardless of the industry or the size of the customer. And from a cloud perspective, that meant you could build and deploy in a single code base and get quite nice scale. Another characteristic I found very attractive was that the average life of a payroll customer seemed to be above 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So if you did your LTV or CAC ratio calculations, they were very, very attractive. And then the third thing, there seemed to be like this platform play potential that if you could win a customer for payroll or for time and attendance, you could later expand to recruiting, performance, comp, and the various other types of talent modules. And by doing that, you just simply increase the return from each of the customers. So at that particular point in time, I had the decision, do I expand into payroll as Dayforce or do I look for a partner? And I knew quite a bit about Ceridian. And the one thing about Ceridian at the time was that it hadn't had technology innovation for probably about a 20-year period. And as such, there was a kind of decline in sales each year. And so I took that as an opportunity to approach the shareholders of Ceridian. And Ceridian was a private company owned by two large private equity firms. And the idea was Ceridian buys Dayforce and I take over the company and we kind of reinvent the company using the Dayforce technology, redo the culture and really have focus. And so it just happened that we had won this very large customer in Europe at the same time we were doing final negotiations with the owners of Ceridian. And because of my sensitivity to addressable market size and realizing that you have to have focus to scale a company, for me, it was really a clear decision. Obviously, for the team involved in the sale of the very large prospect, it was very difficult. And I had to make the call to the customer and say that we were pull in before we signed the actual contract. That was a very difficult call to make.
I mean, I can't even imagine. I'd love it to, and it's an amazing story when I hear and I read about Dayforce and Ceridian and how, outside looking in, it got acquired. Ceridian was the bigger company at the time, and I'd love it if you could share with us, David, that transition. So the deal was done. I mean, how did you manage your team, your organization, which was a smaller one? And obviously, and you did talk about using the innovation, but eventually you used that as a huge opportunity for you to really take Ceridian, take the leadership role as well, and grow it to where it is today.
So it's an interesting question. So to me, it always really starts with the people, with the team. Mm-hmm. And we believe that if you focus on your own employees, on driving a very strong culture that has purpose, that culture eventually leads to a very positive customer experience. And if you get that customer equation right, typically you see higher growth and you see profitability. And if you look at the Ceridian Dayforce story, we're kind of a perfect example of how that is true, and also really how we've been able to use our Dayforce technology to drive culture. Mm-hmm. So when we brought the two companies together, the first thing that I did was I went around to all of the various offices, and we had about 5,000 employees or so. And I was trying to understand the culture of the organization. And what I really found was that within Ceridian, there was a culture of survival. Because as I mentioned, the sales had been declining at the time by about 10-15% per year. The response of the owners was really to reduce the workforce each year to keep the EBITDA or the profitability levels where they needed to be from a debt perspective. And that left people really concerned about their jobs. So what we did is we created a new brand promise for the organization, and we chose Makes Work Life Better. So the idea that anyone who would use our products or services, their work life would be improved, whether you were the CEO or whether you were a frontline worker. And then around that, we specifically chose values that helped us deliver on that promise. And we were very specific in the values that we chose. So we chose things like optimism. For optimism, we defined it as optimism is a planned behavior. It starts with careful preparation, and that preparation leads to knowledge, and that knowledge creates confidence, and that confidence leads to success, and success is reason for optimism. And then we further would clarify it, would say if you're optimistic but you're not properly prepared, that you haven't done the diligence, well, then you're an idiot. You're not going to be successful.
Yes.
And the creation of that brand really served as an anchor to align everyone together and to attract some very strong people into the organization. And we also found that it resonated really nicely with our customer base. And the results have been great. I mean, since the time that we brought the company together, the compounded annual growth rate of Dayforce has been very close to 60%. And that's over, I think, about a 6-year period or so, which is really, really tremendous. And I think, we took the company public on the New York Stock Exchange last year in April. And that's gone very, very nicely as well.
I mean, that's amazing. And you, David, you mentioned a couple of things that I want to really dig into a bit more, just for the benefits of those who are listening today. You talked about understanding what the culture was, and you found it was a culture of survival. I'm wondering, as you were working to create this new value system, these new core values, how do you encourage your executive team and also the rest of the organization to really communicate these new core values of the company?
So we took this very seriously, and it starts, as I mentioned, with the brand promise, and then the values surround the brand promise. Think about the brand promise really as your bullseye. What we actually did is we did training of the executive team on it. We created a book called Our Way, and Our Way captured internal and customer stories about how living our values had led to success. And we then obviously took the book and we distributed to all of our employees. We had value days when we would bring customers in. So, for example, customer focus is one of our values. We would bring a customer in, and we still do, to each of our offices and have them speak about their experience with our products and services so that the organization could develop a lot more empathy for what the customers viewed as most important. And that was very, very important. Also, as part of the way we changed the culture, is we started measuring employee engagement. And we would do employee engagement surveys every 6 months. And we then would turn around the data and compile the results very quickly within a few weeks. And then we would share the results with the entire organization. And we were completely open about the issues that the employees felt that we had to resolve, and we would identify the top 5 items that needed a priority. And for each of those, we would develop programs and communicate those programs out to the employees. And then 3 months later, we would report out how we were progressing against those programs aligned to the priorities that we had to address. And that became very, very successful. Over a period of time, we were able to dramatically improve our employee engagement scores. And from an external perspective, we look carefully at our Glassdoor ratings. Back in 2012, we were somewhere under 2, which is very, very difficult to get that low. And today we're about 4.3, 4.4, which is very high. And our focus on kind of employee engagement led to that. And as to the values, what we also did is we did value surveys that kind of every 3 months we would do a survey to determine if employees aligned to the actual values, and if we had to tweak them in any ways, to re-communicate them in any ways, but also just to reinforce who we were and what our brand promise was.
Talk to me about the length of time it was to create this new brand promise, create these handbooks, and how long it took for the whole organization to really understand, live and breathe these core values that the customers could feel it as well.
So, some of this is just tied to my journey. I've been an entrepreneur for quite some time, and it probably took me 20 years to really understand that scaling an organization really requires this emphasis on culture. And so in the early days, even of Dayforce, we had developed a brand promise. And we had communicated out the brand promise. The bullseye was on every person's desk. And we were quite religious in making sure that people understood who we were. And when we brought the two companies together with Ceridian and Dayforce, again, because of just my background, almost on day one, we started the exercise of doing the survey, understanding the current culture, developing the Makes Work Life Better new brand promise, printing out the bullseye, communicating the bullseye. And so for me, it was basically like, driving. You're riding a bike. This is what you do when you're forming a culture. So I would say probably within 6 months of the transaction, we had identified the bullseye. We were writing the actual book. At our customer conference that year, we actually highlighted it. We handed it out. We had some material about the actual Makes Work Life in Our Way as a book. And we could see the impact almost immediately. The Glassdoor score began improving right at the very start. And I would say within a year, we probably were in the 4s. And
Wow,
remember, this is quite a large organization.
yeah.
We've got 5 different generations that work at the organization, offices across the world and such.
I mean, that's a great story. And I love, and what I'm hearing, right, David, is like, it was sort of your ethos as well in terms of understanding this culture and having that experience from Dayforce and earlier experiences in companies that you've grown in scale. It helped you speed up that process, I guess, right?
Yeah, it was. Look, it wasn't something that came naturally, I would say, to me. One of my board members at the time was a guy named Marty Goldfarb. And this was Marty's thing. In fact, we used Marty to help us with the bullseye. And I'd worked with Marty across 2 different companies. And it took me a couple of decades to really understand what Marty was saying and the impact that it could have on an organization.
If you are enjoying the conversation that I'm having with David and have any comments, questions, or anything related to something that we said, I would love to hear from you. Please join me on my Facebook group where I discuss this episode. I share daily insights, answer questions, and connect you with other like-minded business leaders. Go to thebusinessleadership.com/FB group or simply search for the Business Leadership Group directly in Facebook. I'm excited to see you there. Now let's get back to it. With Ceridian, as you mentioned, into thousands of employees, and the experience that you've had starting companies and growing, there's typically a tendency for organizations to become, quote unquote, an institution that where the culture, I guess, dampens inspiration. Do you have any insights or examples how you've kept this from happening?
So when I think of Ceridian, I think of a technology company. I think about an innovator. And if you know me as an individual, I'm really quite hands-on with the technology. Mm-hmm. I demo it very frequently to large groups. I attend the R&D meeting every 2 weeks where we review every department's current sprints and what's in the current and next releases of the actual product. And that kind of technology focus from a leadership perspective really does keep the emphasis on the company being agile and being nimble and being able to stay ahead of the competitors in the space. And for us, we lead with our technology. If the way we really entered it, when I was looking at the industry back in 2010, as I mentioned, I found the industry really attractive in terms of size, life of customer, and the potential for a platform play. But what I really needed was a vector to enter the industry, a way of differentiating. And the way I did that was through research. I observed payroll people, spoke to a lot of payroll people. And what was clear was that the workflow used by competing or traditional systems was not optimal. Effectively, the way that all payroll competitors work is that they have separation between time and attendance and payroll. Time and attendance is where you effectively clock in, clock out, and where your regular and overtime and premium hours are calculated. And that would be in one system. Mm-hmm. And the data would reside in that time and attendance system for the duration of the pay period plus 1 day. So if you were on a 2-week pay period, for 15 days, the payroll people wouldn't be able to view the data, audit the data, enter in adjustments. Instead, they would have to wait until the end of the pay period, wait for the supervisors to approve the time, and then the data would be exported and imported into the payroll system. And only then would the payroll system be able to calculate the data, reconcile it with time and attendance. And then the payroll people would only have a very short window, about a day, to do everything that they're required to do before they would have to fund the payroll. And that wasn't enough time. In fact, payroll people used to tell me that they commit pay when they ran out of time, not when they were ready. So the idea we had in 2010 was, well, why don't we just combine time and attendance and payroll and HR and benefits into one? So there's one database, one rule engine. And anytime any data changes, whether it's a punch in, punch out, or an HR record change, we could recalculate the net earnings. And if we did that, we could radically change the workflow for the users, make work life much better for them. And that became kind of the genesis of Dayforce, and it's been hugely successful. Since we released the product in probably 2013, we've taken live over 3,700 customers. And as I mentioned, the growth rate's really been tremendous. Last quarter, the growth rate was, I believe, about 38%, year over year. So we're very, very happy with the results, and it kind of comes back down to that emphasis on technology, on innovation.
With this emphasis of developing this new culture of innovation, I mean, you talk about this a lot. Can you share how you or within your management team encourage creative thinking now within the organization?
Well, to me, I think the what normally kills innovation is too many layers in an organization and too many meetings. And instead, we take an approach of where we keep the focus on the customer, keep the focus on the product. As I mentioned, I'm very knowledgeable with the product. I'm able to demo it to very technical degrees, and I expect that of the management team as well. And by keeping that emphasis on the actual product, it makes sure that the technology is prioritized. And then the second piece is that we spend a lot of time with our customers. So probably about 20-25% of my time is really going around and I meet customers and I have dinners with the customers. And I continually ask them what they would like in the product and how we can improve. And that's very impactful. And the third is that we use a lot of technology to get feedback from customers. We use a product called AHA, which allows our customers to really suggest new features for the product and to collaborate with other users of the product and convert the ideas up and down. And we use that to prioritize what goes into our next sprints and our next releases.
I appreciate you sharing that. I've read, David, in the past where you had this mind shift in terms of your focus, and you mentioned it real quickly at the top about keeping your employees happy by providing them all the resources and tools they need to be successful. I'd love it if you could share how this has translated to the over success of your current business, Ceridian, and also the companies you ran in the past.
So look, it's been an evolution for me. My first company I had sold to a bank. It did risk management and pricing for commercial banks. And at the time, the company was me, and I had the belief that if you were a maverick, you would be very successful. And every company I've had since that has obviously grown bigger. But what became very clear to me was that you cannot scale a company with mavericks. It comes down to having that culture and that purpose that draws people together. And then you have to have very strong leadership. And it took me a while to learn this as well. Leadership is not about telling people what to do. Rather, it is understanding who's on your team and what the goals are for each of the members of your team. And if you're a good manager, you should meet with each of your people on a very regular basis, and you should make sure that they are working towards their personal goals. And you should be an advocate for them. And if you do that, you land up with a wonderful team and very high engagement, and you land up with a very good organization, and people stay within the organization. And so that was a bit of a learning, and within that Ceridian, we really try and enforce that. One of the measures that I would focus on would be your regrettable turnover. And for a good organization, you typically want to be under 5%. And Ceridian's is exceptional from that regard. And that comes down from really enforcing this idea that managers are the advocates of their teams.
Being in the technology forefront, David, I'd love to get some of your thoughts and insights about the future of work, specifically how leaders, managers will manage the employee experience with the rise of the distributed workforces, new innovations and technologies like AI. Where do you see the work of the future of work going?
So when I think about the future of work, I think there's going to be a distribution shift between people who work for themselves and people who work for organizations, which is one trend that we see happening already. And the second piece as well, because there are technologies like Dayforce, and again, Dayforce is differentiated in that it has this continuous calculation engine, which means that if I clock in for a day and clock out for a day, when I clock out, the system has calculated my net earnings. And in fact, within Dayforce, we allow you now to access those earnings. So you can do what we call on-demand pay. You don't have to wait until the end of the pay period.
Mm-hmm.
That capability really does allow people, even who are working for other organizations, to augment their pay by finding part-time work or shift work at other organizations, working the shift and getting paid almost immediately. And so I think you're going to see changes in the way that people are paid. I think there's going to be a movement away from those weekly or bi-weekly or bi-monthly payroll cycles to you work a day, you've earned the money, you should be able to access your net earnings. I think that's one change. I think there is going to be a shift to more of the gig workforce or the independent contractor workforce. And technologies, again, like us, will allow organizations to determine how much the person is owed and at the same time pay people with inside all the various and very complex regulatory requirements that are at the state and at the provincial, federal levels. So you can make sure that you're paying the correct SUI and you're paying the correct WCB and minimum wage rates and overtime rates and all of that. And then obviously there is going to be a change with AI or the use of other types of predictive technologies that in some ways predictive tech can do certain tasks today better than I think people can do themselves. Things that have to do with things like image recognition and things and etc. And as those technologies keep evolving, obviously there are going to be certain job functions that might be impacted. But at the same token, I think there'll be other opportunities created, particularly around servicing of people that will become present.
I mean, it's definitely a fascinating time when we are thinking about all these things. And David, you being within that center in terms of the technology that enables a lot of this, do you have how do you manage your team or your management team thinking about that, as well as maybe your organization might have to evolve in managing this new type of workforce? Have you gone into any thinking about that or thoughts?
Well, we're very focused on kind of the gig workforce and different technologies such as a digital wallet and on-demand pay, which we believe are going to become tenants of the future of work. And so we have R&D teams and product teams very focused on delivering those types of solutions. In fact, within Ceridian, we now offer our own employees on-demand pay. Using the Dayforce application. So we've adjusted to that. In terms of predictive technologies, we have a large customer service organization. And so we're now are beginning to use various types of bot technologies.
Mm-hmm.
Within the Dayforce platform as well, we've taken advantage of the advances in natural language processing tech, so all the various voice platforms, whether it be Google, or whether it be Alexa or Cortana. And on our mobile apps now, we have the Dayforce Assistant, which is a voice-powered bot. So you can actually now use the Dayforce app and you can say, hey, Dayforce, when's my next shift? Hey, Dayforce, can I trade my shift with someone? Hey, Dayforce, can I take a time off on Friday? And the system comes back with a proper answer. So if I say, can I trade my shift? It will come back and say, these are the people most likely to accept. So there's an engineer that determines what the person is trying to do and where it needs to go. We're very thoughtful about the future of work, both in the delivery of our products, the use of those new technologies in our products, but also in changing our own organization.
That's really cool. I love that you're talking to your own products now yourself within your own organization. David, what advice would you give to those who are currently looking to growing their executive or leadership team?
So that's actually a more of a challenging question than what most people imagine. Leadership changes based on the size of the organization. And what I found in the past is that leaders who are able to scale companies, say, to the $100 million level, may not be the right team to go to the $500 million level. And those people who might be tremendously successful at the $500 million level may not be able to develop the structure and the processes and the scale required to go to the $1 billion level. And so if you're building out your leadership team, you have to be very cognizant about finding the right person for the scale of organization that you're at. And I made this mistake years ago when I had a prior company. And that prior company, it did very well. We went from a zero to about $100 million in about 3 years. And we had some VC funding in the early part. And the VCs had insisted that we hire a very experienced EVP of marketing. And we hired a person from IBM. And the person, although very, very capable, wasn't the right fit for the size of the organization at the time. At the time, we were just a few $1 million. And we kind of made corrections about the organization, and we were able to be successful. But that was an example where we hired an exceptionally capable person, but just not the right person for the size of organization that we were at. And so when you're building out your leadership team, for every hire, make sure that you are bringing in the best person that you can find for the scale that you are. The second piece of advice about leadership is that there is a difference between an exceptionally competent individual contributor and a good manager. And sometimes good managers do not become, good individual contributors do not become managers. And as you're promoting people into that role, you have to make sure that they are making that transition properly. And if not, you have to make adjustments.
That's great. Fun question, David. If I were to ask any of your teams, it could be past or present, colleagues, stakeholders, peers, what's the best leadership quality that David possesses? What do you think they would say?
Again, a difficult question. From my perspective, I would say I'm just very persistent. Mm-hmm. In other words, if there's a project, if there's a customer, if there's an issue, I will stick on it until it comes to a resolution. And, it takes a lot of energy to do that.
So what else, David? Do you have any other special projects, initiatives, or it could be something fun, another mountain that you're looking to climb, something that you're really excited about and looking forward to?
Well, the continual expansion of Ceridian is something that we find very exciting. Continued growth of the organization, the use of the newer predictive text inside the actual product, and also the work that we're doing around the gig economy are all pretty exciting.
Before we end, David, any final thoughts, observations? Ideally, what we like to do is have anything that you could share that gives an actionable recommendation to the emerging business leaders that are listening today.
The one piece of advice I would give is if you are scaling an organization, you cannot overemphasize focus. Often I see companies that are scaling that take on too many disparate projects. And if the projects don't align well together, you aren't going to get scale. If you don't get scale, you're not going to be able to grow your company. And so just making sure that you are really, really focused. The second piece of advice is just on really understanding your addressable market. And if you're looking to grow a large organization, it's very, very important that you select a market where the addressable market is exceptionally large. In other words, you're looking for an addressable market, preferably in the tens of billions of dollars. And the last piece would be tied to both of those, which is focus your company on the largest addressable market that can be solved simply so that it can apply to everyone and that you can get efficiencies and grow the business profitably. In other words, don't choose the most difficult problem. Choose the simplest problem that you can solve for the most amount of customers.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. To close, David, can you tell us where we can find more information about you, Ceridian, or anything else you'd like to share with us today?
Sure. Well, Ceridian, obviously, our website is ceridian.com. I'm on Twitter at the Ossip, so DOSSIP. I'm on LinkedIn as well as David Ossip. And happy, obviously, to hear from anyone.
David, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to join us on the Business Leadership Podcast.
Thanks very, very much.
That's it, biz leaders. Thank you for joining me on the Business Leadership Podcast. This was episode number 103 with David Ossip. If you want to learn more about David, Ceridian, or anything else that we discussed, please go to thebusinessleadership.com/103. Join me on my Facebook group where I will discuss this episode, answer your questions, and connect you with other like-minded business leaders. Simply search for the Business Leadership Group directly in Facebook. And lastly, if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe and rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. Thank you again. Edwin signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Business Leadership Podcast at thebusinessleadership.com.